Welcome to another episode of Roads to Equity, where there are many paths, but only one destination. Our conversations unapologetically elevate BIPOC and LGBTQIA+ leadership. I'm your humble host, Dr. Dwight E. Rhodes, and we're thrilled to bring you today's show. From billion-dollar boardrooms to classrooms of the future, our guest, Dr. Steve Chambers, helped shape the AI revolution, scaling giants like Nuance and pioneering voice tech before it hit the mainstream. Now, as a 2023 Harvard EdLD grad, he's channeling that bold leadership into EdTech, where AI meets human potential. From billion-dollar boardrooms to classrooms of the future, Steve is reimagining how we learn, lead, and thrive. In this episode, you'll hear how Dr. Steve Chambers is reimagining EdTech with AI and visionary leadership. Stay tuned for another inspiring conversation packed with actionable insights. But before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to Roads to Equity for more inspiring conversations with BIPOC and LGBTQIA+ leaders making a difference. Now, let's jump into our conversation with Steve. I will turn it over to him just with this one question. Who are you and what brings you to this space?
First of all, thank you. My name's Steve. I've known you, Dwight, for a while. We went the same doctoral program. Dwight was my mentor, a challenging mentor he was. But before I went back to school to get this doctorate, I started my career as an actor. After a year and a half of getting a lot of steady work, went on the business side and then did higher education and then started a whole string of high-tech gigs. So I've done 4 startups and was a public company officer. It's funny, I really appreciated and was thinking about this podcast and you and the stand you're taking. I was starting to reminisce about my coming out process and how that intersected working in environments that were incredibly heteronormative. The bro culture in high tech was off the chart. It still is. It's still the epicenter of broness. And I had a very serious illness in 2017, what caused me to really reevaluate life purpose. That's when I pivoted towards education and did some formal academic programs in education, a master's and a doctorate, and worked in the ed sector field, looking at the intersection of technology, AI, assistive technologies to help kids with learning gaps. So that's what my passion has been over the last years.
Excellent. I love that. You've already alluded to a pivotal moment when you had a health scare and you started thinking differently. But I'm really wondering about what memory do you have as a child that helped to shape who you are today?
I do, and this is a generational commentary because my father was a strong deep voice, didn't say a lot. We jokingly now call him Yoda. He passed a long time ago. I was the youngest of all boys. It pressed upon us humility. He gave the standard phrases, God gave you 2 ears and a mouth, use them in proportion. People don't care about you. They care about you caring about them. He had this great saying I think about all the time. Every interaction I had, I tried to leave the other person feeling more motivated and clear. Sometimes that was having the hard conversation, sometimes coaching and inspirational. The reason why that's so important now and why I think it shaped my life is it created this orientation of listen, don't share. Then we get this world of social media and I'm in high tech and everyone started to project identities through the mediums of these social technologies. And that just wasn't comfortable. And today, where you and I got our doctorate, there's a huge emphasis on authentic leadership that very centers on tell your story. What is your story? It's really uncomfortable having had all those experiences and those words of it's not about you, it's about them, it's about how you make people feel. It's hard for me even today to understand that new generation in work environments in particular, understanding that the real person they're following, the leader company is key. And that means caring and that means vulnerability, going deep. It was so informative, guideposts that by my father, that today I've got to unlearn. And that process of unlearning, refining, and finding meaning in those words, yet making them modernized is something I think about a lot.
Yeah, I can only imagine. You and I share the commonality of being the youngest of three. I'm the youngest of three males, and all three of us are gay. And I tried everything in my power so I wouldn't have that identity marker. Obviously, it didn't work out. Some of the lessons that we learned from our fathers, although they were meant to shape who we are as men today, we've had to unlearn. In that process of unlearning, what parts of it were really at play when you engaged in this doctoral program that places so much emphasis on adult development, having a socialized mindset versus self-authorizing? I can remember some of the conversations you and I had about your place in the program and you really thinking deeply about why you were there. Share some of your thinking about self and your place there in that program and what it meant for you and in your journey for having a better understanding of who you are and why you deserve to be in the place that you were.
Imposter syndrome has been so popularized. I felt less like a faker. I was feeling that the guy I am, the guy who was supposed to be there. It wasn't that I felt like, oh, you don't live up to this, but I just felt I don't belong, regardless of whether I was acting or authentic. I was the only gay person, and the LGBTQIA issues got short shrift. I told a story about my first work experience after I was an actor. I worked at a company that did multimedia. So we produced annual reports, advertising, brochures, all the media was tilted towards print versus online. They sold more in the first year than any sales rep had ever in their history. And after that first year, when the owner found out I was gay, he sent me to high performance psychologist. I was excited to meet this person because this person was supposed to be about unlocking your highest and self. It's almost hard to believe this can happen. He said, so tell me about your father. And I said, my dad's this, my dad's that, et cetera. He said, you had issues with him. And I said, I'm very close with both my parents. He said, no, you had issues with him. That's why you're gay. And I thought,
Oh,
I
wow.
need conversion therapy. Even after I worked my balls off that year for them, even after that, this guy was trying to tell me that I could change because I had trauma from my parents, which I never had, that he could correct. And I remember to this day, I'm very proud of myself because I remember 10 minutes into that, I stood up and said, look, this isn't for me. I don't think I'm the guy you think I am. And you've said nothing to try to get to know anything about me other than your presumption that if gay, then dad bad. And it's just wrong. And you're just wrong. And I went back to the office and walked into the actual owner of the company and said, I don't know how you thought that was okay to send me to this quack, but I don't want to work here anymore, and walked out. And it was my first job. I feel freaking violated. It's to have someone so overtly tell you your way of being is wrong after you've performed, like in their little social world. They did a freaking great job and it didn't matter. And I mean, I have 23 nieces and nephews. I'm very sensitive to their environments and the leadership they're around at their age. I was in my mid 20s and very impressionable. I was much more than a lot of my friends. So it hit me hard.
That's a powerful story. And I appreciate you sharing that. That's pretty ballsy, right? It's just like, you know what? I am not going to go through some imposed conversion therapy when I am a damn good salesperson and I've done this for your company, but you don't respect, me holistically, right? I think that's some really good advice for someone today that is struggling with place-based identity. Should I be fully authentically me in this space? We are facing some pretty strong headwinds. When I say we, I'm talking about BIPOC, LGBTQIA+, our allies. I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts around what advice would you have for someone who is struggling to show up authentically in their workplace today?
I don't know why I'm talking about my father so much because my mom was wonderful and I'm very close to her. But I remember he said something once. First of all, the pervading wisdom and the pop culturism of show up and be your authentic self, screw the world, you do you, and those ferocious individualistic views, I think that inspires bravery, and I think that's good. But it's not the full credit answer. How can we be authentic if people aren't listening? And I do think it's incumbent on us to think not only about my authenticity, my identity. It's necessary for the other person to understand, absorb, observe, sometimes to help them figure it out. I realize there's a fine line between taking as a personal responsibility, helping someone else discover the aspects of your life, particularly in a marginalized population. But let me give you an example, because this is a little oblique. I was at a family wedding and I was sitting next to my brother-in-law. I love this guy. He's hilarious. And he's very simple. And he looked at me, and I'll skip the preamble. We were having a dialogue about the election, which had just finished. I got the sense about who he voted for. He got the sense about who I voted for. And again, he is a lovely, funny, he's just a great guy. And he leaned into me at one point and said, "You don't really feel like your rights are at risk." And I thought, oh my God, this is a glorious opening. His ears are open right now. I now understand his frame about my life. And the bar is so low. His frame is at risk. It's not thriving. It's not, do you feel like this candidate in this political environment are going to support you to achieve your highest and best contribution? It's risk. It's rights at risk. And I looked at him and I said, we don't have to go into this at depth, but I love that you asked me this question. Here's my very clear answer to you. 100%. I'm not ambiguous. It's not even debatable. I'm happy to share with you the metrics associated with that risk. Lawsuit velocity filed against LGBTQIA populations in the US during this election process. It's a stat. It's an indicative stat. The use of Roe v. Wade being overturned to take other rights like gay marriage and chip at them. There's already legislation pending on that topic. I didn't go into all that with him. I just said, yes, me, your brother-in-law, who I think you love, who we laugh together, and I think you're hilarious, and you think I feel that way. And it stopped him. It created an interruption because he voted for the candidate of his choice based on, I think, fear motivation, based on immigration and economics, because he's somewhat wealthy and he fears the loss of economics. He fears the loss of leadership. But he didn't quite feel that an opposing view of social encroachment, the lessening of rights, was accurate, was possible. So I guess to answer your question, that was a long-winded way of saying, I don't think it's the full credit answer to do the I, me in the environment. I'm authentic. That you have to be. And it creates an incredible comfort when you do. It took me very long compared to other friends of mine to tell my story at work. I feared the repercussion of not advancing the way I wanted to. If I ignored the ears on the other side of the table, it would have failed. It would have been a show. It would have been performative authenticity. Sometimes, as marginalized populations, we got to do extra work to just make the ears open. His question, you don't really fear for your rights, do you? It was a major opening. There was work. I recognize a lot of my friends would say we shouldn't have to do that work. But if the objective is authentic presentation with freedom, with satisfaction, with fulfillment, to me, that for me only, might not be the case for other people. I want my brother-in-law to listen and understand. He might not agree, but now he knows. There are gay people all over the family and close to him that he doesn't even know about. He'll think about that, I believe.
That offers the opportunity to say when we disagree with him, there's an opportunity for us to, and it's really difficult. And I don't disagree with the additional burden we carry when we are trying to get the world to see us and our value. Yes, you appreciated your brother-in-law. You'd walk through that door and say, hey, look, this is why. Yes, the answer to your question, let's be clear, 100%, there is a threat. There is a risk. Here are some examples. And the fact that you had to do that is unfortunate, and it's also necessary. What is it that you do? In light of all of that, What do you do to keep your joy, to find your joy in the face of such adversity? I almost wanted to say perceived adversity, but it's not. It's a reality. You already identified some laws that are being rolled back. Literally, as we speak now, I'm sure the current president, and I'm intentionally not evoking his name in this conversation because that's just what I want to do. Signing something else is going to chip away, right? And so I'm really curious, and I'd like for you to share with our listeners, what is it that you do to remain sane? And the assumption behind that is that you're sane to begin with. Why don't you just find your peace?
I haven't found my peace. My partner, 30 something years, has the news on 24/7. It's inescapable in the house. So one thing I do, turn down that volume. So that's a form of ostriching, but you don't have to immerse 27 in all the vagaries of the many levels of persecution that are happening right now. So one is a little bit of constructive distance, which I think implicit in that is balance. I saw Chapel Roan on the Grammys. And as I watched her do Pink Pony Club and this choreography with these clowns, and I'm watching this thinking, queer fucking joy. I was so proud. I was so happy. I was so joyful. And I sent that video to 20 friends, all LGBTQIA friends, and said, look at this. Look at the young Tennessee woman who put on this amazing moment where Alicia Keys and all these John Legend and Queen Latifah, everyone's singing her song. And I thought, holy, this little, she's young, 21, 22, 23, comes from Tennessee, pays homage to Santa Monica and LA, sings this campy song, which is really about queer joy and queer love. And everybody singing. Take those moments. Those are my moments. It's not for the world. In that space, I was like, she's singing to me and my people. And she's just saying, find your place, be with each other, have a blast, dress up like a clown, go dance like a, but do whatever, you want. And I think that freedom, that joy is an antidote. It's not the full credit answer because we've got real work to do legislatively, but your question, how do you find peace, joy, fulfillment amidst what feels like sitting between two sides of a vice that's slowly turning and you can't get out of its grip? That's how. And I love that. So I'll seek that out 1,000% for this.
I love it. Hey, I don't know how you're in a household with listening to the news because I'm a news junkie and I do international news, BBC, Al Jazeera, Franz Van Kat, and then of course the local media as well. But since the elections, I've intentionally stayed away and I've been inoculating myself. I'll take a little bit of a shot of the news in the morning and then I'll hear something that is potentially triggering and I don't turn it down. I turn that shit off. I'm like, I can't, I am not doing this for my mental health. And speaking to that Grammy moment, you know what came to mind? I thought the exact same thing. I was like, this is absolute queer joy. And it made me think about this song it's pretty old. I think the singer is Leanne Rimes. I hope you dance, right? You just take when life is happening and it's just crazy, just choose dancing, which is ultimately the joy for some of us. Definitely mine. So I share that moment with you. And you're absolutely right. We have to find a way to, one, stand firm and push against the prevailing winds. But then also we have to balance that with our own internal peace. And I heard you when you said, I haven't found peace, but this is what I am doing. And I'm with you. And every morning I wake up, there is this potential gut in my feel, like this nut in my gut, and where it's just, oh, he's in the White House. He's going to do something else today to create absolute chaos, which is intentional, right? Because a part of his whole persona is shock and awe, running his life, running now the nation as if this is a reality show. And like any good reality show, you got to have confusion, you got to have drama, you've got to have that, you've got to keep people engaged. But unfortunately, that's not the way you run the country. And a lot of us are feeling it. So finding the joy that way is what's most important. I'm really curious about you telling the audience something that someone just, the people who know you just wouldn't know or expect or suspect about Dr. Stephen?
What comes to mind is introversion, extroversion, and how much I think about this sounds heavier than it is. It's a lighter thought in my mind, but it's about how personalities evolve based on age, based on experience, and based on these punctuated moments of extreme change. And I used to feel very, I wouldn't say naturally extroverted, but I would prefer to be with people and not, would prefer to be active and lively and not. And my sister-in-law, who's wonderful, is very quiet, but super smart and interesting. And she gave me this book called Quiet. And this book was so fascinating. And all she said, which is again, she doesn't talk a lot, even though she's very present. So I just find her really cool, magnetic person, just wonderful. She gave me this book called Quiet. She said, if you want to understand me, read this book. And as I'm reading this book, I'm realizing all the tendencies I fight because part of I think it's a very American thing to put on a pedestal extroversion. And I'm doing my last academic degree right now, and it's almost all group work. And I'm older than most of the people. And in my group it's 6 guys, 2 are military. One woman friend of mine in the cohort said, my God, that group needs a testosterone tab. And she's right. These are like guys who they say things like, I'm an extrovert because I talk a lot and I like to take space. And they take a lot of space. So the thing I think my friends wouldn't know is I'm much more intentional, self-conscious, and not always in a confident way. A lot of times in an insecure way about teetering on this introversion, extroversion, and this idea of how much space is enough space. I don't like being the guy who invites people in. I even hate that phrase. It just is, there's an arrogance to it. So it's your role to invite in. My brothers and other friends have the grand meritocracy theory. The floor is open. If people want to come in, they can come in. I didn't have to invite them in, nor should I keep them out. So I think they'd be a little surprised that even in one-on-one interactions, I'm thinking a lot, not in a scorekeeping, turn-taking way, but I'm thinking about the dynamic. Am I getting energized by this person, or am I feeling a little depleted, or am I feeling nothing? Am I talking too much? Am I taking things and turning them around? Or in my case, am I asking too many questions? Sincere interest, but am I asking them questions such that the other person, if they were a little introverted, are feeling almost a little invaded? That's what I discovered from my sister-in-law. I thought I was showing her support by talking and drawing her out. And I think, although I didn't get to the point where I said, hey, in this book, I told her how much I appreciate it and how much I learned from it. But what I don't do now is go into this interrogative spree that I used because it's fun for her. And it didn't even occur to me. So I think that level of in the moment reflection on social dynamics and my own kind of struggling with having been more extremely extroverted and post illness in particular and post education, far less, and trying to figure out what people need to be happy in a relationship with me, to be comfortable. Those things occupy a lot of my thinking.
Yeah. And so it makes me think about something you alluded to earlier with your father, not quite putting these in these terms, 2 ears in 1 mouth. We listen twice as much as
Mm,
we speak. And I think that's another like pearl of wisdom from you, where that we need to remember it's not just about us, but it's also about the people in which we surround ourselves. And how then do we show up and feel comfortable with ourselves and also not provide, because that almost has that air of arrogance. I am providing you the space for you to show up to be who you want to be. Just the space is there for them to show up, and we're listening and we are observing who they are and how they present to the world, and that's okay. So
mm,
I think that's an interesting proposition to think about introversion versus extroversion. And it's not that didactic, right? There's fluidity in that, and it shows up
mm,
differently with whomever. Because I never thought of myself as being extroverted, but yet people perceived me that way. And I thought that was always interesting because I was quite comfortable sitting in the back of the room somewhere. No disrespect to you, Rosa Parks, but I did. I wanted to sit in the back of the room and just obviously observe what was going on, what was happening, so I could generate these questions. But in the household where I grew up, my curiosity was not valued in a way that made me feel seen because I was told, you're just being nosy. Why are you asking those questions? And so I think about, oh, just a sidebar. Yes, I remembered not just Lisa Leahy, but Bob Keegan is a person. Exactly. Yeah, we're like, yeah.
It sounds very vaudeville.
Exactly. And so it makes me think about another woman's experience. Of course, you remember Gorillas in the Mist, right? Of course. And I don't know if you ever heard her story, but in the sake of time, she was at a family event and she wandered off and she was gone like until almost nighttime. Are you familiar with this story?
Yeah.
And the family realized, oh my God, where is she? She's not here. And so they created a search party. They were looking for her. And she comes wandering out of the woods, completely okay, many hours later. And her mom goes up to her and she hugs her. And she's, where were you? What were you doing? And Jane's response was, I was observing the animals. And she went on to explain like why she found it so fascinating to do. And it was in that moment that her mom's response made Jane, who we know of her today, instead of chastising her, scolding her, saying, don't you dare run off, blah, blah, blah. Her mother embraced her and said, that's beautiful. I'm so glad you enjoyed yourself. But she went on to say that next time, just let us know. But in that moment, she's like, she embraced she saw Jane for who she was, and she honored that. And that made Jane the person who we know today. And I think those moments are because the reason I share that little vignette is because it illustrates how we need to spend more time trying to understand how people make meaning of the world around them and not instantly jump to conclusions, right? Yeah. So obviously we can go on with this conversation, but as always, time is elusive. But I do have one more thought I'd like to share with you or question. And this is one that I'm positing to all of our guests, right? So when you think about the type of world you would dream of that includes our community, the LGBTQIA plus community, our allies, that's completely accepting, what does that world look like to you? And how do we make it happen?
I just my mind went back to I have a dream because all the elements of that world are so explicit in that particular beautiful oratory. In the LGBTQIA, I'm going to say I would like a mixture of science because these debates about the existence of fluidity are crazy. And the science would be not the full answer, but it would be a bedrock, a touchstone. And I think that's very important to have a little more of those voices look at not just the social, but the aspects that are more even biological, to just to help people understand and have a grounding. So that's part. The second is we don't really have supports, and I've been in and around education, and I understand we have the school counselor, we have this, we have that, but it feels like bad hair transplants, like a pop-up here and a pop-up there and a lot of space in between the sprouts. And there's going to be a little bit of flow continuity, a little bit of acknowledgement and presence in the form of materials and school contexts and supports that don't pop up in crisis. Because that's great that we have in some spots. You could argue that's not well covered either. Supports for kids really in need. But that's a little different than the kind of object permanence and the de facto presence in materials and discussions, et cetera. One of the most toxic elements, I think, of our socio-political world today is the educational constraints being put on. And that's, we are going to suffer from those shackles, those book restrictions, those don't say gay restrictions. We are going to suffer and have a generation of people that know who they are, and not in a healthy way of, hey, set me up, I'll find out, I'm going to be in great shape later. Don't know who they are because they weren't given permission to think about it, and they're going to pay. So I guess the scientific realm, talking a little bit more forthrightedly about, look, it's not just about your sex markers or your genitals, it's about the psychology, and here's what that means. And then also a little bit more of fluidity, flow, and presence in and around education that acknowledge these populations and try to mainstream them, and not just gay day, March blah, blah, but just with a little bit more consistency. And then the third is the legal world. So science, legal, socialization, education. It's not just one of them. If we now feel, you and I are in a generation, I feel that you and I feel that some hard fought wins, we're watching them be chipped away. And it's actually hard to get a sense of the magnitude of where the chisel will stop. Because it's so iterative and slow, I don't know the degree of threat, but I'm starting to feel like that degree of threat is far greater than I thought it was before. And I go back to my brother-in-law's point. So those four pillars, to me, they're the building blocks for a world where people just feel like it's an identity marker. It is a point of separation. It's a point of unification with like folk. But it's okay. And it's not just enough to say, hey, you're accepted, but there are elements to incorporate thriving. Not just keeping your nostrils above the waterline, but swimming like a champion. I think those four elements in a coordinated fashion are needed. And I worry about the balkanization and state-specific legislation, pension. I think we're going to have a messy culture, not in a celebrate diversity way, in a repressive way. I think those four elements, foundation, consistency, and for us to wake up a little bit.
Yeah, I actually have a t-shirt that literally says, wake up. And I wear it proudly around this area. But the funny thing about that is it's not a social statement. It's actually a t-shirt I received when I bought this pillow.
It's crossover marketing. It's just word.
And let's be clear, that pillow did not come from you know who.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. The pillow bear.
Can
Can you do me a favor before you wrap? I'd like to hear your answer to that, because you were my formal mentor in the program. Not to blow smoke, but you have a lot of attributes besides the obvious wisdom and the fire in your belly. You also have vision. And you're one of those people I feel who actually hold place for what's the direction the world could go in that would really make a better place. How would you answer the question you asked?
I really appreciate that. And I tell people, flattery will get you everywhere. I'm just doing my small part. I've stopped prioritizing other people's comfort over my humanity, right? So I show up. I want to have conversations about everything, about why you may have voted for the person who's in office now. I don't instantaneously cut you off. Like you've alluded to before in this conversation, it's just creating the space to have conversations and not immediately jump to a defense mechanism where, oh, I can't believe that you voted for this or you've done that or you've believed this. It's just simply showing up every goddamn day and pushing harder for things that I believe in, that I know that every single person can benefit from, and not having transactional relationships, but relational interactions with people where I am trying to show up not just for me, but for you as well, and having the space where we can all coexist. We don't have to agree. Actually, I love discourse. Let's disagree. But just showing up. And so the world would look like that. And it's been a while since I've said this. There's this old metaphor about diversity. It's really old, I think from the 80s, where like you had this soup, right? Melting pot is what it was called. You remember back in the day when people used to refer to diversity as
Sure.
like, oh, melting pot. And then it evolved into this salad where that you can actually see every different ingredient distinct and beautiful in its own right, holding its place in that bowl that we call life. And so that's what I see. And I don't think that's unlike what you just shared with our audience. It's just like having a place
Mm,
where we don't have to fight to be seen. We don't have to fight to belong. It just organically exists. And
mm.
there's no more conversation about that other than the fact that someone's curious about it as opposed to having to have to defend it. So I guess
Yeah,
my long answer is I no longer have to defend my identity markers. They are just simply there and they belong wherever they are.
I like that.
So
that. I also have a little saying right above my monitor, and it's two of them, and one of them speaks to what you and I have been talking about. Not to decide is a decision. So when you're complacent, you're actually making a decision.
correct.
Yeah, and then we fear the thing we want the most, which I find strangely motivating. But those two things are sitting above the monitor.
Yeah. And see, we find our own inspiration. Obviously, we continue the conversation, but I really do thank you for making the space for us to just have this conversation about everything that came to mind.
Mm.
Thank you, my friend. I enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, thank you.